All right. So, welcome to the August edition of the Prep User Group. We got a lot of good stuff for you going today. We've got Christopher Scott and Fraser Gallop ready to present some really good things on Tableau Prep. We got things from productionalizing it to implementing some best practices with a supply chain use case. So this group is led by myself, Jenny, and Jack. All the prep folks all in one place. So it's always fun to get together, talk things prep, see how different people are using it, how they're applying it, and just have a general discussion about the messy side of Tableau, where all the fun happens. If you haven't already, checked out the Bevy platform and seen what's going on there, make sure that you join the user group, and that way you can get updates, see what's going on, make sure that you're able to always join our events with us. If you're interested in presenting, got some cool use cases, got some cool things that you're doing with prep, want to show it off to the world, make sure that you sign up so that way you can share those things with us. Also, don't forget, we have the Tableau Prep Playground Slack channel. If you're already in there, it's been a little quiet lately. So, but we're still there. We're still listening. We're still keeping an eye out for things. It's just usually not as much chatter on the prep side, but it is there. So go in, meet some folks, talk about prep, and ask for advice on best practices, ways to implement it, and things like that. We've got Dreamforce coming up. Don't forget, it's coming up in 2 weeks. So excited for that. They've got, you can check out all things related to Salesforce. I know there's been a couple of prep updates that tie in a lot of the Salesforce side, and they'll also have some good Tableau content there as well. Lots of folks from the Tableau community, sessions on Tableau, whether it's more standalone or integrating Tableau with your Salesforce environment. Lots of good content there. And with that, got to do the shameless plug. I will be presenting at Dreamforce a pretty short session, really more just rapid fire tips and tricks on making sure that you really understand the full breadth of Tableau Prep and just how to get the most out of it. So that'll be fun. If you're going to Salesforce, hope to see you there, or Dreamforce, hope to see you there on day one. And with that, we've got our speakers. So like I said, we've got Christopher Scott and we've got Fraser Gallop, and we've got two really exciting presentations I'm excited to see what they've got for us. And so give me 1 second. So, yeah. Like I said, I joined this call slightly late and had some issues getting in the platform. But Chris or Fraser, did we decide who wanted to go first?
Yeah, I think I will go first because everything.
Alrighty.
I'll let Fraser kind of back clean up here, and I actually had no idea until this morning that who my co-host was. I didn't look too intently, and recognized Fraser's name from the Kansas City user group a few months back that we co-presented on as well. It turns out that I'm actually implementing a lot of the things that Fraser had talked about in that meeting. So yeah, it's funny how it all kind of works out.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I will go ahead and pass it over to you then, Chris.
I appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Let me go. Oh, yes, maybe I can do this. All right, let's try and see if. All right. Let's just share. I'll share the whole screen. There we go. Okay. All right. Can Jared, everybody see my screen?
Yep, I can see it well.
Got it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. Well, this I believe is my first time sharing with the Tableau Prep User Group. I am a longtime prep user and kind of first time caller, first time presenter for the user group. I have attended several of these user group sessions as an audience member, and lots of questions, and just how can we leverage it, what are some of the best practices. And so I've tried a few of the prep and data challenges early on, and encourage all of my my team and my prep users to try those out, to get better with the tool. And so so I'm really excited to join you all today. Essentially, this session is really going to be very autobiographical. Some of the challenges that we've had, and really about how we have tried to scale out and bridge the gap in our data preparation, data transformation at our organization, but also how any organization can leverage this. So it's not going to be, we're not going to get too into the specifics, but just some best practices, some things that I think would be valuable really in any organization to help you to utilize prep to bridge the gap that you find within the kind of ETL space, and to scale your data transformation. So without further ado, again, if you don't know who I am Christopher Scott. I am a Tableau User Group leader. I lead the Raleigh-Durham Tableau User Group. So if you find yourself down here in Raleigh, please hit us up either at RDU Tug or at CG Scott DVA on formerly known as Twitter, now X. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. And I'm also a Tableau User Group ambassador. I am a newly appointed senior manager of data enablement here at Enact Mortgage Insurance in Raleigh, North Carolina. I lead a team of data enablers. So we some of them are data engineers and Tableau Prep users, various things around data quality and data governance, data management, and it's just a great opportunity. And this is one of the tools, one of the platforms that we use, to really help us to enable our data consumers, our producers, all people that use and consume data. And I also run and manage our entire Tableau platform. So we are on Tableau Online. And so I'm actually not gonna get into that too much. The great things that I have really found here in Tableau Cloud is that there's pretty much full parity with using Prep out on the web version. And so that's one of the opportunities that we have found with a lot of our data being on premise, and we published a lot of data out onto our Tableau Cloud. We're actually able to leverage Tableau Prep a lot more than if we just had the desktops. So as we talk about adoption and rollout and ramping out and enabling that self-service, having Tableau Cloud has actually allowed us to do that to an even bigger degree. So I won't belabor that point any more, other than to say I am a big advocate as well of migrating to Tableau Cloud. I have a few sessions that are recorded out on the interwebs. You might have seen the one that was promoted by Tableau Training this week for migration. So if you have questions about that, feel free to ask me about that as well. So the thing I want you to think about, as I said, with Tableau Prep and with anything, is always to think about your goals. So with Tableau Prep, it's not just about prepping your data, right? So that's a big component. But when you think about how you utilize this within your organization, so whether your role is just you're just trying to clean up your data, you are just trying to get something that you can analyze, put it in Tableau, and then start visualizing the data, or whether you're on the complete opposite end of the spectrum like myself, or you are in an kind of ETL role, or if you're in data engineer, IT type of role, wherever you're at across the spectrum, it's always great to think about what are your goals. And so for me, and for thinking about organizational challenges and things like that, I thought about 3 goals that I thought that we value here, but also they're really just kind of general goals that I would hold to no matter what company I was at. One thing is the main goal of Tableau Prep and I'm sure you all have said this through this user group a dozen times, is we want to enable self-service data transformation. So our goal through why do we use Prep instead of some other tool, is because it can enable any analyst to be able to transform their data very quickly and drag and drop simplicity, and be able to hook to data that across the board. So all of those things wrapped up. It's a really big goal of ours, and I think should be a really big goal of any organization. One of the other big components here that we've kind of struggled with is this big gap between kind of what we've done with Tableau, all the things, the self-service, all of those components, and then the other end is a full-scale ETL. It's a very very structured. There's change controls. There's all of those components, and then there's this massive gap right in the middle of the opportunities that you have to enable, present data, help people consume data across the organization. So I think Tableau Prep is one of the great kind of equalizers or gap fillers, as Tableau is in many organizations. Between we used to think about the ways of kind of how we get data from the source, and then how we analyze that data through report. It used to be reporting. Tableau kind of filled that gap. Well, I think Prep can do that for data preparation and transformation as well. And then the last one is, one of the biggest components here as we think about those first two things is this whole idea of governed self-service. I know that feels like a really big kind of catchy buzzword, but we obviously want to provide some best practices for that governed data. And so if we're saying that Tableau Prep can be an enterprise solution, these are things we have to think about and we have to take into account. And so we're going to kind of use these three as our framework for the next few minutes, and just talk through some best practices and things to help us achieve these goals. So one of the biggest components here, as we're enabling that self-service, and the things that we think about when we think about how do we enable more people to utilize Tableau Prep, is this idea of virtual connections. And so I think this is a really critical component, that as you help to enable your users to use Tableau Prep, having virtual connections is a kind of a big stopgap. It's a big opportunity to really ramp up that self-service. And so for those of you that don't know what virtual connections are, you may have heard about them at Tableau Conference. Hopefully you are leveraging them at your organization. I am taking all of this from the Tableau website, as you see below. And I just wanted to bring, because I think it's really critical as we think about how do we utilize and leverage Tableau Prep. Leveraging these virtual connections is kind of a big step in that. So what does it do? Again, it allows users to access primary data sources through kind of a single, and we use a single service account, a single account. We obviously want to limit these single points of failure, so we don't want necessarily a user's account, but we establish this virtual connection, and then as you see, you can create these TDSXs, you can create TDS files, TDEs, hyperfiles, all of those things through that single account. And it allows users to actually access multiple tables across several databases, which those of you that are familiar with kind of the data warehouse structure in a lot of tools, if they are out across different databases or schemas or any of those things, or just pure different platforms. As you see here, this example was SQL Server. If you had something in SQL Server and in Oracle and in Snowflake and DB2, wherever they are, trying to get those connected is near impossible with any other tool. But I love the fact that Tableau, whether you're using desktop or in this instance Prep, you can do those multiple connections, and then it's super seamless through. And then the last thing is, as we think about the enterprise, one of the our key points here is that it allows the admins to manage extracting data and security all in one place. So you don't have to worry about those individual connections and how they're secured and who's using what and all of those opportunities. You can leverage them and secure them all in one place here in this virtual connection. So again, things that we're thinking about across the enterprise, and how do we leverage Tableau Prep to be that kind of gap filler and enable the self-service. So the next thing we're going to talk about is actually how do we productionalize prep flows. And I'll be honest, I have pinged I've pinged Fraser before. I've pinged a lot of different individuals across our Tableau community and across the COE community, and just trying to figure out what are the processes, what are the steps in an organization as we think about, kind of how does our data move, from that development environment into production, but also we getting rid of the traditional kind of SDLC waterfall methodology. And so as we think about those things, and this is a question, honestly, I have struggled with. I've been using Tableau for the better part of 12 years now, and this is a struggle with both Tableau desktop. So as you publish workbooks, and now that as we're starting to really ramp up and utilize prep as part of our entire process, these are things that we continue to think about. And so I'm going to give you some best practices here, some things that again we are utilizing. I hope that Fraser has some other great points about this, because we continue to, this continues to evolve, and we continue to have better thoughts. We kind of iron sharpens iron, right? We get better ideas as we kind of go through the process. But so this is not the end all be all, but I did want to provide some practical steps for, as you look to leverage these across the enterprise, things that you want to do and think about in that instance. So what is this? So we need a process for developing and productionalizing data transformations through prep that helps to provide, again, this idea of trusted data sources in both Tableau and other databases. Now, one of the functions that came out, I believe it was about a year ago, maybe a little bit over that. You all can keep me honest here, but is the ability to actually write back to other databases. And this is really, I think this is really critical, that as we see Tableau Prep as this big kind of gap filler, that we can take Tableau Prep, create a productionalized workflow of data transformations, see the full end-to-end lineage, where it came from, how it was transformed to where it's productionalized, and not only create valuable data sources for our Tableau analysts, but also for if there's individuals across your company that are using machine learning tools, modeling tools, and I'm not going to pretend we all, I think we'd all be naive to think that all of our analysts are just using Tableau, which we would hope, but there could be opportunities for other tools in the mix, that as users analyze data. But if we're seeking to provide those valuable data sources to our organization, where individuals that have access to the data, they can see, they can transform it, they know how the data functions, they can create this prep flow, and then they can publish it for Tableau consumption and within other databases, whether that's SQL Server, Oracle, Snowflake, S3 now, any of those instances, we can actually provide end-to-end solutions for our for data consumers, report analysts, all of those people, without having to kind of involve IT. And so this is a really great opportunity to really democratize not only data, but also the kind of production flow here. This is where we mentioned that creators, so are the people that are actually in the dashboards, they're creating the dashboards, they're leveraging the data, they can develop these prep flows ad hoc. And what we can do is we can, those of us that are kind of on the admin side, we can take those prep flows and we can help to move it through and productionalize those so that we can actually push those into a production environment. Again, whether that's on Tableau Cloud, Tableau Server, or on a productionalized data warehouse, so that they can be consumed across the organization. So I think that's a big opportunity that we have for doing those things. And one of those ways that we can do that is actually on my next slide, are things like our peer review checklist. And so when we think about, we've got this prep flow, we want to move it into production so that other organizations, other people across the organization can use that data, they can consume that data. And most importantly, and I think I mentioned it here, is this keyword trusted. We want to provide a trusted data source so that if individuals are using that for analysis, for, again, the ultimate thing is for making decisions, right? If we want individuals to use that data, to trust that data, to make decisions off that data, it has to be trusted. And so one of those ways we can do is actually, and again, this is where I mentioned right before I started speaking about Fraser. And so a lot of these ideas, I've kind of gathered from different places. So these are some best practices that we have leveraged, and that I think I kind of hit them very generically, but just some things to think through. And then you can actually use these, copy and paste these, and put them in a if you want to create an Excel spreadsheet where you've got a checklist or whatever tool you use to create this checklist. But we're going to kind of walk through these really quickly and just move through, and so you can see what are some best practices that is we're looking to enable, but also create data sources. What kinds of things do we need to be thinking about as we leverage and productionalize these prep flows? So the first one, why do we do this? And so this is the opportunity where we actually work with our creators to instill and enable these best practices for data transformation. So the first thing is, obviously, as you're working through those step names, making sure they're human readable. And what that means, we kind of came up with this number, and I think it's the number before you start to see the ... So we said no more than 14 characters. Mixed case, or that kind of camel sentence cased, no underscores, very human readable, so that if I'm an auditor, or if I am if I am an ETL engineer and I wanted to kind of remake this, can I understand what is going on in each of these steps within my prep flow? And then adequately describe the action that's going on in that step. And when we talk about action, kind of one of the things that we came up with was make them action verbs, right? So put in that step exactly what it is that you're creating or you're doing in that step, and then use that description box to further spell out. But we want it to be very, very much, as you're looking at the flow, as you're looking kind of end to end of that lineage, you want to very quickly be able to spot and see what's going on within the flow without having to dive in and actually get into the weeds of what's going on in the flow. Because as many of you know, some of these prep flows, they can be quite long and laborious. And so we want to make sure that we can very quickly analyze what's going on in our flow. With the joins, again, these are very critical. Remove or merge, depending on the join type, the redundant columns. So I used to love the fact that when you join the data within Tableau, the field that you joined on was automatically merged. Well, as you know, Prep doesn't do that. So taking that opportunity, and then I'm sure you all have some experience here. I can't tell you it does and when to merge or remove those columns. And so if you all have some thoughts or experience there, I just know that we take the opportunity to look at those steps after the joins and make sure we understand where those primary fields are coming from. The inputs. So maintaining the original source, the name of the source. We found this to be really critical as we look out across across once it's published, we can see the names. And if we've gone back in and we've made those changes to the field names, they come across as, as the name of the prep flow with a whole bunch of information afterwards, versus if we just leave it alone, they're going to come through as the primary source name. And this is where, again, we utilizing published data sources when possible, because this eliminates the need. So as our creators are developing these flows, going through and instead of just connecting to, the virtual connection or the raw files, say, hey, is this using that search bar? I think Tableau Tim actually did a session on his YouTube channel last week about the Omni search function. And so training the creators to use that Omni search to search through and see, hey, is there a data source out here that leverages this data that I can bring into my prep flow, rather than recreating and creating duplicates of the same data. It also, I don't want to miss this here. That last line, preserving lineage. This is so critical, because if you were to look at the lineage, and if you have, again, a few of these functions I'm mentioning, kind of that star there, I should have put a star on this one too. They do require the data management add-on. So I want to make that clear as well. But if you have that, you can see the lineage, seeing that full end-to-end flow where you click on a source, and you can see which data sources are created from that, which prep flows, which outputs, which workbooks, worksheets, all the way down the lineage. So you reuse that have been published is critical to maintaining that lineage. Removing unused fields and data elements that are not part of the output. This obviously helps with performance, as you all are very aware of. And then our output steps. Again, checking the counts against the source, the naming reflecting the output types. And then also, as you're creating your output name, distinguishing whatever it is with prep or something similar that's going to say, okay, this output source, as I'm looking across all my data sources, I can tell this one is a primary source, this one is an output from a prep flow. And oftentimes, as users as data consumers are trying to find new sources for their dashboard, they're going to get confused if we just use a similar name with regular Tableau data sources than our outputs for our prep flows. And then finally, one of the things, this is again, very arbitrary number, but if you're using more than 6 sources, really think about your performance here. And then if you can split it up and utilize the smaller flows and link those tasks, that may help your performance in that. But again, having the ability to link and to schedule those tasks does require Prep Conductor. And so I want to make that very, very clear here. So, but that is it. So I do, that's the end of the show here. What is going on? And so I wanted to go back really quick to this before we head out. Just to keep this in mind, again, what are your goals? I think it should be all of our goals here. We want to continue use Tableau Prep to enable self-service data transformation first and foremost. We've talked a lot about bridging that gap from the full-scale ETL. So how can we fill that gap in an organization, in an enterprise? And then obviously we do want to provide best practices so that we can have self-service govern self-service data. So with that in mind, and I think I stopped sharing. So there we go. Okay. All right. I see a lot of questions here. So because I know it's 12:30 my time, I'll pass it back over to Jared, and then I'll try to answer these questions in the chat here.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you so much for that breakdown. I see the only real question I saw in there was one about the free flow text box, which I'm assuming is a reference to annotations, which would be nice if that was in there. But I also think having the the descriptions in there. That's something I mean, everything I have in prep is there's so many descriptions in there.
Yeah, that's where I said on the step name, we try to limit it to those 14 characters, because you are limited in that. So keep them very short, concise, readable, and then everything in the descriptions there. I think that's a critical component. So yeah.
Do you use the change descriptions?
The change descriptions. So is that in when you open up the boxes, like what changes occurred?
Yeah, so like, you can describe or add the description to the overall step, but then you can add the description to each change within.
No, we do not use that. That's a great opportunity there to really get into that detail. I think what we were after, Jared, honestly, is just a matter of a non-Tableau Prep user. So thinking about really that scale, right? A non-Tableau Prep user coming in and saying, okay, where did the data start from? How was it transformed? And where did it go to, in a very quick step? But then you're right, as we seek to reuse and make those edits and changes, that could be really, really valuable to some of our developers.
Yeah, I think, I go back and forth on those two, because it's like sometimes the calculation or the filter happening is straightforward enough that you don't have to describe it, but then there might be some of those that are a little bit more complex that maybe require, like, someone might not understand right away, why did we implement this very complex calculation for one change?
Yeah.
Last thing too, there's some chatter in there about having a clean step dedicated to one type of change versus like mixing them all. So for me, the way when I build prep flows, I typically think of them as I'm always in a SQL mindset. So like, I'm not thinking about it necessarily as, let me break this down into each transformation. I'm thinking about it as terms of like, if I was building a CTE based SQL statement, how would I build that?
Yep. Yeah, and so I think having that knowledge is certainly coming at it from a different lens of me with no SQL knowledge. And so I have learned SQL through Tableau, and so my understanding of how data transforms and works together is all from that lens. And so this is almost like a third way of doing things, because you now have to think about it from source, whereas Tableau was the complete opposite, where you had to think backwards and back into those joins. And so what you're talking about is coming at it from the SQL lens, where you're building out those things. So I mean, I think for me, simplicity is obviously the name of the game. And then if I can not do a clean step, then I won't do a clean step, because I want to try to preserve as much of that kind of single frame as possible.
Got it.
But
That makes a ton of sense. That was an awesome breakdown though.
Thank you, Jared. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. All right. Let me share real quick. Let me hop back. All right. So we got some good breakdowns on, some good ways to go about productionalizing it. And so now we've got Fraser up with some best practices using a supply chain data set.
Good morning. Good afternoon to the UK guys. So just
go ahead, take it away.
You're sharing, so I can't share. No problem. We got it.
It's other.
I say, like, I'm super good in Microsoft Teams because I use it all the time. But then if you put me into like a Zoom meeting or anything else, I'm like, what do I click? What do I do? Thanks, Jared. So thanks, Christopher, as well. So I'm gonna kind of go through. This is like a real world example where we kind of needed to build some reports, and Tableau Prep turned out to be the solution today. So hopefully a little bit more hands-on and demo-y. That's what I'm kind of going for. But before we get started, I'm Fraser. So I am the leader of the Edmonton and Houston Tableau user groups. Edmonton is home with my family, but I split my time between Edmonton and Houston. I work as a Tableau and sometimes Power BI analyst, mostly focused on like the data architecture type work and building data sources. And my hobby is to play with old pre-iPhone type electronics these days. So it's just interesting when we had like physical buttons to like stop and start music and that kind of stuff, which is interesting for me at least. My day job is like I said, I'm working as like a Tableau analyst with Onware. We kind of specialize more in the architecture, engineering, construction industry, but also work with customers in other industries as well. And we love prep. So I showed this before. This is the wall just kind of outside of where I'm at right now. We're actually changing offices in a month, and the wall's not coming with us, which is quite sad. So we have to get some good pictures of it before we go. But yeah, we really like to use prep in our day-to-day work and kind of promote it with our customers whenever possible. So today I'm going to talk about inventory turnover, and this is there's a link there in the QR to an article that I found on the NetSuite website that talks a little bit about inventory turnover. I just stole the text from there. But what it's doing is it's calculating how fast you're moving your goods that are in inventory. So if you have kind of a high turnover ratio, that means that you're turning over inventory really, really well. If you have a really low number for your ratio, that means it's time to have a sale on those things because they're not moving out of your warehouse very fast. And so the problem was that the customer wanted to calculate inventory turnover a couple different ways. They wanted the company-wide number. They wanted it by warehouse. They wanted to do it by product line, and even be able to drill down to individual products. The other challenge that we had is that it's important for this to be monitored over time. Is your ratio increasing or is it decreasing? So it's not just a run it once type of report. It's like you want to look at it on a very regular basis to see that. Part of this information is like an industry kind of standard calculation. So, board of directors is interested in that. Ownership is, interested in that, kind of having that information and reporting on that information. And so when I got involved in this, it was actually the second attempt. So the first attempt, someone else, one of the internal analysts started doing some work on this. He started doing a bunch of custom queries on their ERP. So he was using SQL. He didn't have, inventory levels historically or inventory values historically. So he was trying to reconstruct it using stock journal, big queries, big complicated queries. He went into other tables to work orders to try to bring additional data in. There was a really high row counts and lots of joins happening. He never did get anything that was usable and eventually gave up on it. So the second approach, when I got involved, we kind of went through and I kind of got the definition from the customer and said, okay, we have this data already. This particular customer had some really good certified data sources on their Tableau server. So like for example, like the sales data source, you can kind of see here, it was connected to 92 workbooks. People are hitting that left, right, and center. It's a big data source on their server. So my approach was, okay, I'm going to use Tableau Prep. I'm going to connect to these existing data sources that we already have, and we're going to build a flow that will support the calculation and the reporting that we need to do. So I'm going to give you a demo and kind of dive into the flow a little bit in a minute here. But before I do that, I just want to kind of go through some of the things that we'll look at. So, as a tip here, reuse your certified data source. Like the real advantage was that we are leveraging the validation that went into the data source ahead of time, so we can be kind of certain that we're getting good data. The other thing with using those data sources is that they're really actively maintained and they're closely monitored. If something goes wrong with our sales data source, we have a VP of sales that's like, calling us the next day or the same day to say there's something wrong with the sales data source. So we know that our inputs into our prep flow are very well trusted within the organization. The other one, and Chris kind of mentioned this already, is keep your columns clean. You can do clean steps to do that. I'm going to show you a little shortcut with the aggregate step, but don't introduce a lot of extra columns into your prep flows when you're bringing in your existing data sources that are just not going to be used in the output. Try to keep it down to what you're interested in as you build out your flow. Think about your data source standards, column naming. There's no versus num versus number. Number obviously being the correct choice out of the three. If you disagree, you can post in the comments, or we can get a beer sometime and discuss it in more detail. When you're joining data, one of the really important things to do is kind of keep in mind the level of detail that you have in your prep flow. So in the case of my inventory turns flow, I'm creating one row per product, per week, per warehouse. So if I'm doing a join, I want to make sure that I stay at that same level of detail and I don't change my row count from 1 million rows to 10 million rows. So when I'm joining, I'm really only adding dimensions in. Maybe I'm adding a measure in, but I'm not adding many to one relationships. Just kind of keep that in mind when you're building your flow, so that you don't blow up your row count and get something that's not going to work for you. For the most part, I say inner or left joins only, just to make it easier to read and understand what's going on. Other types of joins do exist, but I'd say we very rarely use those. My pre-join, post-join thing, I'll show you that as an example. I always kind of nag about this and just making sure that you're taking the right columns and moving them forward when you're doing your joins. And then the last thing I want to cover is Excel. We made our little t-shirt there. You can hit me up if you want one. We do have a few left, I think. But the point is, sometimes it's hard to avoid Excel. In this example, I had to do date scaffolding. There are better ways than just embedding Excel in your Tableau flows or creating data sources and publishing to your Tableau server with Excels. So the example I'm going to show is how you can store an Excel in SharePoint and use a live connection to get to that. Tableau added that almost a year ago, about a year ago, the option to get a SharePoint Excel and have that live connection. So I highly recommend that if you are doing anything else, try to move to those kind of things, and you don't have to worry about making sure your Excels stay up to date. So we'll get into demo. Let me go over here. Okay, so this is my prep flow. I've already kind of got some of the pieces in place. I've just connected to Hyperfiles rather than the live server, so that we don't have to deal with internet issues and slowness. But what you can do now is you can go and connect to data in SharePoint. So the one that you would be interested in for this is the OneDrive and SharePoint Online connection. And what will happen is it'll just pop up in your browser. I'll pull this over here so you can see it. Basically just to authenticate you with the server. And then it's like, I'm happy. So you can close that. And then you get a little browser right within Tableau Prep, so you can browse your SharePoint sites. So I can go into my team site. I can find my Excel. That is this guy here. And so I can connect right up to my Excel there. And that becomes like a live connection. So whenever my flow runs, it's going to go out and get live data back from that Excel that's stored in SharePoint. So I can bring that in here. So I've already kind of done some work here. One of the things that I wanted to kind of point out early on here is this aggregate step. So this items data source, if we come back here, you can kind of see it's got 122 columns on it. And I really don't need all those 122 columns. I could do a clean step here and I could remove columns that I'm not interested in. But I like to use the aggregate step to do that. And what happens is I'll just take the fields that I'm interested in keeping and bring them into the group field. So what will happen is only these columns that I've kind of brought into this aggregate step are going to move forward in my flow. The neat thing about doing it this way is if somebody goes and changes that items data source after the fact and adds 10 more columns on that, I'm not going to see 10 more columns on my Tableau prep flow. So those won't make it through. If you go and take the approach where you're deleting specific columns, then any new columns will still come through it into your flow. So it's just a way to kind of keep my flow a little bit cleaner. So I've got my items up there. I've got my dates here. I need to do some scaffolding. So in this case, I don't want to take all dates. So I do a couple of filters on here. I'm looking at just the last 365 days. And I'm doing this just on Saturdays only because I don't need it to be more often than that. I'm trying to manage row counts on my output data source. So to do the scaffolding is really easy. You can just create a calculated field, call it a join field, and give it a value of 1. Same thing on the other data source. And then when I join these two together, I basically have every item in every branch or warehouse for every day or every Saturday. So I can do that as a left join there. And then actually, sorry, that's not a left join. That is an inner join. Come on. Come on. There we go. Okay, so that is an inner join in that case, and then I'm gonna bring that forward into my flow. I really like this is something, I don't know, maybe everyone knows this except for me, but if you need to reconnect stuff, you just drag it onto add. I think back when I started using prep, that was something that like I was clueless for a long time to do that. So we'll bring my flow forward. The next thing that I want to do here is I want to bring in my sales data. So I've kind of got, oh, sorry, I skipped over this one. This is my item snapshot. So this was one of the key things that made this work for us. So the first time that the person attempted to do this was he was trying to go through and calculate historical inventory levels based on a stock journal, which just had tons of individual transactions. It just didn't really work for us because it was too complex of a query. So what we ended up doing was we did a nightly snapshot of our inventory levels and the average cost of those items. So it just on a nightly basis, it writes that out to a SQL table, and then we connect up to that as a data source. So that's just a snapshot of the inventory. So that helped to really simplify the problem, having that extra piece in there. And then when I bring in my sales data here on the orangey line, I'm only interested in the last 365 days. So like I mentioned here, when I start, I've got kind of one row per item per, if I scroll past here, it's in here as facility, but that's like the warehouse. I've also got some additional information on the classification of the item, but a relatively small number of columns coming in here, and it's really one row per item. In my sales data source here, this is like all the invoices and the cost of goods sold on the invoices. So there's quite a few invoices that are happening on a daily basis. And so what I've did is I just aggregated everything up here on the day and the facility and the item number. So I've got the total cost of the items that were sold on that date. And then I need to do in my calculation, it's actually like a moving window, like it's a 365 day average cost. So I'm gonna, in my join here, I'm just gonna set things up. So I'm gonna create a calculated field to date minus 365. So use my date add function. That gives me, 365 days ago. I'm just going to change this from a date time to a date as well. on Jared and Christopher's kind of conversation about putting multiple things in one clean step, I agree that we should minimize the number of things that we're doing in each step. In this case, I'm kind of getting my date minus 365 field in place. So multiple steps I would say are okay in this one, and then just kind of name it so you know what it's doing in the step. But if I started working on another field, doing other transformations on other fields, I'd say, do that on a different step for sure. So now I can join this onto here. And then when I do this join, it's a little bit more tricky than a normal join. So I want to match on the facility. That's the branch that picked up just fine. But I also want to match on the item number. So you can see I've already went through on the left side of my join here on the additional table. I've marked the columns as delete. So those are the columns that will be redundant, and then I'll get rid of after my join step happens. So I can pull that one, and then the other one I need to do is match on the date. But in this case, I'm going to say the date is greater than or equal to that. And then I'll do one more join. Date 365 is less than or equal to. So that gives me like a 365 days of cost of goods sold. So I get I can do my average cost of goods sold over that period. That one should be a left join as well. And then I'll attach it onto here. And then afterwards, get rid of my delete join fields. I do one more aggregate at the end here. Because of that, the join, I did blow up my row count a little bit. So again, I'm getting it back to my my desired output, which is one row per item per branch. So I've done that again in the grouping. I've summed up my average costs. And then the last step here is just renaming because that extended cost, average cost field name doesn't really mean anything to me. So I gave it a good field name. I can run the flow now. This initial flow did not really take very long to build. So probably I'd say I worked maybe about a day or so on this flow, and then it took some refining and things like that. But it's certainly not like weeks of writing queries or things like that. It was a relatively small amount of time that it took to build this out and get this working. You can see that in my flow, there's actually no calculated field for inventory turns or anything like that, because I'm just preparing the raw data to go into Tableau Desktop. So if I run this flow, it's a few million records that it takes to run. And then eventually it's going to produce my output. I just have it doing a hyper file right now. So I'm going to show you my workbook here. I made a really simple workbook just to show you like connecting to the output of the flow here. But really, I only needed one calculated field inside my workbook, and that was the turns calculation. So I have my last 365 days cost of goods sold. I have my value of inventory, and that's my calculation for inventory turns. So really simple in the workbook. The other thing that I'm doing is I'm just using a parameter to filter to a selected date. So that's the date of the snapshot that I'm working off of. So I can go by branch. I can look at my inventory turns calculation. No problem. I can do it by the category of the items. I can do it by the items. It's really straightforward and easy to use data source now. My columns that I'm using in here are just what I need to do the analysis. If I really wanted, I could always go back to the prep flow and add more detail in there. But it kind of turned a really big problem down to something that was really manageable and not too bad. I'm just going to kind of go through this one more time and see if I forgot to talk about anything. So we started off the flow. We had our full product list. We had our daily inventory snapshots as our two kind of main inputs. We did some scaffolding for the dates. So we had dates. The reason for doing the scaffolding, I maybe didn't mention, is that items are not always in stock So like if it's not in stock on a particular day, it won't be included in the daily inventory snapshot. And that's why we had to do our scaffolding, because the item may have kind of come in and out of stock many times, but we still want to capture that in the turns calculation when we're doing it at like the branch level or the company level. The sales data sources where we got our cost of goods sold. One of the things I didn't mention, or I briefly mentioned, is we did this weekly only. This was kind of a refactoring thing. When we first ran this, it did work, but we were getting like, I think over 100 million rows of data in our data source. So that's where we kind of, limited to 365 days, weekly only. We said, if the need comes up and somebody wants to do an analysis more detailed than that, we already have the data and we can output a bigger flow data source if we wanted. But just for keeping it and our Tableau server happier, we kind of reduced the data kind of as much as possible, so we're not generating for things that we're never going to actually look at. There was the last 365 days that we looked at, and collapsing the row count. So, now when I run this flow, it takes about 2 minutes to run on my local computer, probably about the same on the Tableau server. So it's not a very complicated flow to run. The other thing that we do with these is when we're publishing to the Tableau server, we're always using link tasks. So in this case, like after the, I can't remember exactly how we did it, but this flow is using the items data source. It's using the item snapshot data source. If we were like using another flow and having that involved in this, we could do a link task to make sure that the flow runs when the input data gets calculated. So that's something to keep in mind because it's really useful. This was the final workbook. It's not that fancy, but it does kind of give all of the information. So if we think back to the early slide where I said, what are the requirements, we've got an overall inventory turns number for the company. So this is like the weekly number. We can look at inventory turns by the product type. We can look at it by branch on the right here. We did a little scatter plot as well because it looks cool. It's a nice way to visualize the data. And then we've got a timeline with a trend on here as well, so we can see if the turns is increasing or decreasing over time. We also put some information into the workbook as like parameters, just having the turns goal in there. You can see that there's two little gaps in my timeline. So there's two occasions here where our snapshot stopped working. So we've got a data gap in there. So that's one of the maybe disadvantages of taking data snapshots. If you lose your data snapshot, then it's gone forever unless you try to reconstruct it. But for the most part, it works really well, and it saves us a lot of headache in things. So that's pretty much what I wanted to cover for today. I want to do the shameless plug like Jared did. I'm also going to be at Dreamforce, and it looks like my session is like either right before or right after yours. I think it's right before yours. So you guys can all come to my session first, and then you can go to Jared's session afterwards, and then we'll all go and have beers or other drinks on Salesforce afterwards. So I think that's it, unless there's any kind of questions or things like that.
That was awesome. I really liked that tip that you had with the aggregate step. I use the aggregate step. Actually, I find myself mostly using it for like deduplication.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's still really smart because you could use keep only, but then if you've got like still like a decent set of fields that you want to keep, it could get or if you've got like a couple hundred to like search through to make sure I'm only keeping the 10 that I want.
Yeah, the old way was like we'd click on 100 of them and say remove these, and it did it in like one step, and then one of those fields disappeared, so we'd have to go through the 100 fields to try to like fix that step. And so it's all about maintenance and keeping it running over time.
For sure. One question we have is if you have ever run into issues with the integer and string agreement conversion.
All the time. It's something you have to kind of keep in mind. That's where maybe it's better to like look at data dictionaries for your source systems and see what should the field be. Tableau does a pretty good job of trying to figure out should it be an integer or a string. Sometimes it gets it wrong. I can put a dig and say that Power BI almost always gets it wrong, so you have to manually do it anyway. Yeah, so that's whenever you're doing your joins, the data type has to match, and so it's best to like make sure you know what it should be and what the data can contain. Otherwise, it could blow up on you later on.
Yeah, for sure. Doesn't look like we have any other questions, but yeah, that was awesome. A lot of good stuff in there.
The date one, I said really briefly too, like I didn't really explain why, but when you're comparing dates, they default to midnight, but I think it's always better unless you really need to compare time, to convert the fields just to dates instead of date times, just to make it easier. Like in Tableau Desktop, if it's a date versus a date time, it's more presentable in the user interface. So if we don't care about time, it's typically just change them to date fields to keep things cleaner.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
No problem. It was great to be able to do it.
All right.
And looking forward to see you at Dreamforce.
Yeah, that'll be good.
It's
I'm
like
only going to be there for the first day, but I'll be there all day. So I fly in like Monday afternoon and I fly out like early Wednesday morning. But yeah, we should hang out, catch up.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, let me share again real quick. Come on now. Really just the closing slide, just so you have something to look at. So yeah, this a lot of good stuff here. Always good to see how people are really using prep, and as you get more seasoned with it, some of the tips and tricks that come with it to run into errors a little bit less often. And then when you start getting those really large flows, being able to break them out, like Christopher was talking about with linked tasks, can also be pretty helpful. So yeah, this was recorded, so we'll be sure to get the recording out there for you to go back in and see some of those things, see the live demo, and incorporate some of that into your workflow. Like we said, we've got Dreamforce coming up in 2 weeks. There's going to be a lot of good content there. So really excited to see y'all there for those who are attending. And just a last bit of, information, not really information, but I am right now trying to crowdsource some information, specifically to prep. And I have a question for you, the audience, that I don't have a great way for you to get your answer to me, but if you want to find me on Twitter at VizWhat, or if you want to find me on LinkedIn, just Jared Flores, I want to know from you, when you want to understand how a prep flow was built, what are you looking for? What are the key things you're looking for to like understand it? And not necessarily to understand how to go and build it, like rebuild it and replicate it, but really more so you want to understand what's happening in the flow. You want to understand, okay, I know I've got a flow that's got 5 inputs and an output, but what is happening? Why did we build a prep flow for this? So if you find yourself asking that, or trying to, you've got a lot of prep flows in your organization and you want to understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and ultimately what we get from it, let me know what you're looking for. What are the key things that you have to understand an output outside of the context of prep, but also in the context of exactly what's going in there. So shoot me a message if you have some thoughts on that. Would love to hear it. And that's all we got for you today. So thank you so much for being here, for absorbing the information. Thank you to our presenters for the lovely information, and we will see y'all next time.